Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
Well, this is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. For those of you who are listening on the radio, this is part 2 of a series that I'm doing with our Phil Tyler. He's very much involved in our community. He sits on many different committees and commissions, both at the local and state level, if I'm not mistaken.
State no longer, but local.
No longer, all right. And we're talking about a press conference that Chief Meidel and I did about 3-4 weeks ago. Time kind of blends anymore. And we're talking about the gang issue. So if I can get that first slide brought up. So it was on the 8th of March. The Chief and I had a press conference. And go to the next slide. And it talks about the juvenile associated shootings that we're seeing within our region. And sadly, we had another drive-by yesterday morning.
Wow. Out
in the valley. And this is far from normal. As we get through the slides, it'll become very apparent how far out of normal this is. Next slide. You know, folks, this is what it looks like. You have juvenile gang associates, and I want to stress one thing. Every ounce of information that you're going to see that it was associated with this press conference concerns 64 people. 64. Now, Phil, you and I, in the last segment, we talked about how this is multi-generational,
yes, sir.
Multicultural.
Yes, sir.
So let's get this concept out of your head. And I think that most people understand this, but some activists like to throw the grenade that, oh, you're labeling people of color as gangs. No, we're being honest with you. It's multicultural, multi-generational. No one race owns this problem. It's Spokane a problem for everybody.
Yeah, Spokane owns the problem.
But what you're looking at is you have 3 different gang sets here. And each one of those dates is the date of birth of a person. Now, since they're juveniles, you can't throw their names up there, but you have 3 different gangs out there that, you know, quite frankly, it's kind of a really odd mix. We liken it back to Colors, all right, the movie Colors.
Okay.
And because they're actually exchanging rap wars, you know, you diss me, I send a rap directed to you, you send a rap back to me, I shoot one of yours. It's back and forth. It's exactly what we're seeing right now. This is like watching in the 80s and 90s all over again. And these kids have really bought in and adopted this culture. And quite frankly, folks, that's our fault. Everybody that's listening to, that is our fault. We allowed this culture, this gang culture, to become pop culture, something that is accepted. And what's acceptable about kids dying? What's acceptable about kids going to prison?
Yeah.
We did this to ourselves. And now we have to find a way to unravel that and go, no, this isn't being cool.
Right.
This isn't what being a man, quote unquote,
right.
is. This is pure violence. And the worst part is, you and I, if we were in this set, can be sitting here, friends today, and tomorrow I shoot you. Over what? Some slight, whatever.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
we can literally be today doing this,
Yeah.
tomorrow they shoot each other,
Yeah.
and they have no remorse. That's the scary part about this. There is no remorse about this. it's kind of a new dynamic because even the older gangsters that we're talking to, the OGs, if you will,
Yes, sir.
are going, these kids are off the charts. They're like, they are out of control. We are afraid of them, is what they've said.
Wow. Wow.
Now these are the originals going, we're afraid of these kids.
Yeah. So you go back upstream and you think, how is it that these otherwise young, vibrant, skillful, intelligent young men and women could be so cold-hearted to sit one day with a friend or a peer, and then the next day be willing to take their lives? And we talk about, the lessons learned or taught by us. You've probably sat next to someone who at one point you assumed was a friend. And then the next step, they were wanting to kill, not physically, but you in the media. If that's what we're teaching our young men and women to see,
Yes, we are.
How do we expect them to react any different? If we're not showing them how to problem solve, how to deal with their emotions effectively, taking away this misconstrued image of masculinity or femininity, for that matter, how do we expect them to behave? That's why it comes back to us, the community, their adult peers, their mentors, etc. Because we're doing the same thing as adults. I know you're subject to it. I know Craig's subject to it.
We
I've
talk
been
about
subject to it.
bullying. We talk about bullying all the time. I mean, everybody talks about. Us older people are the biggest bullies on earth. Have you ever watched and listened and looked at Facebook, folks? How you're interacting with each other, what you say about each other, how you portray each other. You would never do that face to face.
Yeah.
I'll guarantee you. But what are we teaching our kids?
What are we modeling?
And if you don't like something somebody says, you get your friends on Facebook and you all dogpile on.
Yeah.
We are teaching our kids this bullying.
Yeah.
We're the biggest bullies on earth, the adults, and we're teaching the kids just to do the same. Could I see the next slide? What we're looking at here is what we call a peacock chart. Now, each one of those green dots is a person. Each one of those pinkish, yellow, reddish dots are the crimes they're associated with. The bigger the green dot, the more crime associated with you. Again, this is 64 people.
Yes,
Look at all that crime.
Yeah.
64 people. Next slide. And here's the demographic we're seeing. 75% are juvenile. 25% are adult. Now, let's not get too crazy about the adult side of it. That means that they are over the age of 18, 19.
Okay.
So don't think that they're old adults. Now, a few of them are. A few of them are the old OGs that are still in the mix.
Sure.
The next demographic shows that this is the multicultural problem. These 64 people are made up of this demographic: 12% white, 8% Native American, 2% Asian, and 78% African American. 75% are male, 25% female.
And I think this is the slide that people are getting caught up on.
Sometimes.
We're talking about these 64, if I'm
64
following.
people.
And
64
of those 64, this is a demographic. And what that says to me, and what it should say to the broader community is this. If it says 75% of those, 78% of those are young black males or black folks, there's almost 5,000 of us in Spokane. What that's telling you is it's still a small population of those offenders. And what it says even deeper than that is it's probably the same ones doing the same offenses. It's not,
You and I have seen that all our career.
Oh, I've seen it all the many years in the jail system. So to say it's a broad problem for minority communities in general, it's not the fact. It is those within that community, a subset, small subset of them that are committing these offenses. And we have to acknowledge that. We can no longer remain silent in our own communities to this inter-community violence and crimes. It's okay to say, Ozzie was cutting up And he needs to get some accountability. That's
right.
okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I think we get caught up in a pie chart to say, whoa, it's just a black person problem. It's not.
All right. Let's go back to that pie chart real quick. Because Phil, you and I both know that pie chart is not an accurate reflection of the gang problem in Spokane.
Correct.
In totality.
Correct.
Because in totality, if you take a look at the gang problem in Spokane,
Right.
it is majority white.
Yes, white male, 18 to
Okay.
25.
But this subset, this section, these 64 are made up this way, and some extreme activists want to go, oh my gosh, the sheriff and the chief are saying that all people of color are gangsters. And that's not what the chart says.
Right.
It says 64. We were very clear,
Yeah.
very succinct. We actually, the chief said, I want to stress, this is 64 people. Next slide. So this is some of the crimes that they've committed from January of 2000 to February of 2021. 4 homicides. Now, here's the tragic side of that. The tragic side that the activists don't want to focus on or do not want to even look at. They want to just focus on that other chart. But that every one of those people that under that murder manslaughter title were African American. 100% of the people who died were African American.
And if they died by the hands of another brother or sister, we have to address that issue.
Yes, we do.
And every one of those 4 has a family.
They do.
So it's not just 4 that are impacted.
No, it's generations that
Yes.
are impacted.
And we have to stop being silent within our own community. We have to target those who are targeting us. Look, I can sit here and tell you, if a brother is bringing drugs into his or her own community and poisoning other brothers and sisters, we don't want them part of our community. If a brother is willing to pull a trigger and take the life of another brother or sister, we don't want them part of our community.
It's true.
And there's many that are speaking up and saying that. They don't get the camera attention.
No.
They don't get the media attention. But we're talking about, this is why we're here today. A professional businesswoman, Latrice, reached out to me and said, we have a problem with our youth, Bill, and no one's talking about it. How do we address this? So I brought together a cadre of people that I know. Black men and women, professionals, pastors, educators, businessmen and women that said, we are willing to work with whomever it takes to stop people taking the lives of young men and women in this city.
Exactly.
And that means working with our law enforcement partners. That means working with our business community. That means addressing these issues that, you know what? Our people may be killing our own people. And that's a problem.
It
and
is.
we need to talk about it. We need to deal with it.
Next slide. So the assaults that you saw on the previous side, those are all felony level. Those are not misdemeanor level assaults. Those are serious felony level. And we have had in this region in the last 14 months, the city of Spokane for 20 broke the homicide record.
Yeah.
We've never had that level of homicides in Spokane. It's bleeding into Spokane Valley, it's bleeding into the unincorporated jurisdictions also. Out of that pie chart, 12% of that is linked to Juvenile Gang Association. 12% of that 31. So again, that's how these 64 people have affected the overall. 12% is significant when you take a look at what we're seeing. And that 31 are just homicides. That's not the drive-bys. And many of the drive-bys aren't being reported.
Right.
Part of the reason the chief and I stepped up was some victims refused to talk.
Sure.
Well, we need people to talk if we're going to stop this bloodshed.
Yeah, and that's generational too.
It is.
If we are the adults, the parents, the aunties, the uncles, the grandmothers, the grandfathers, if we are teaching our youth to hate our law enforcers, that's going to create silence. Silence creates violence. Here's what I mean by that. We've seen our Asian brothers and sisters targeted recently in our nation because they believe that the elders in that community won't report those because they've had some level of negative interaction with our law enforcement or negative interaction with other citizens. We need to stop being silent about that. Yes, I know it could be scary. Yes, I know it potentially puts you in threat, but your community is under threat.
Yes.
So it's going to require us to talk. And if we're talking generational, we have to stop as adults saying, fear your law enforcement. Now look, I've had to talk with my boys. My oldest son, before he passed, I had to talk. And both to them, to a man, said to me, well, we know Ozzie, we know the deputies. I understand that. But I just don't want you to make that mistake to where they have to come to my door and tell me your son's no longer here. So having a talk is okay. But let's not create an environment where we tell them they are the enemy.
Exactly.
And then we're not sharing that information. You only have a certain amount of deputies. Craig has a certain amount of officers. But we have the eyes and ears in the community that we know what's normal and what's abnormal. And when we see those abnormalities, we should be reporting those.
I hear you. The thing is, the talk isn't just one side or one race. My parents had the same talk with me. I had the same talk with my kids. And at the end of that talk was, oh, by the way, if you do disrespect them, I'll deal with you when you get home. But this is how you handle if you get pulled over. You simply do as they ask you to do. If they do something you don't think's right, we'll deal with that after that contact.
Absolutely.
We'll deal with that later. But you do what they ask you to do.
Absolutely. And I would go one step further. I have relationships with my law enforcement brothers, but I've even told my children, if they ask for permission to search your car, you, by your rights, Fourth Amendment, don't have to authorize that. Unless they have a reason, you tell them no. It's not trying to be non-compliant. You would say the same thing.
I gave that speech to them. They don't have the right just to search things.
But I would tell them, if they're asking you to get out of the car, just do it.
Yep.
We will deal with the issues that come thereafter. I don't want you to lose your life.
That's right. Yeah. Next slide. Again, this is just trendline information on what we're seeing. The assaults, don't get too confident that the assault, because that trend line is going down, it's just simply because in the last month that we did this, it wasn't as large as it was in all the other months. So don't get too happy to see that trend line going down. It's not really reflective. Next slide. One more slide. These are gang trends, and this is you and I. For it seems like forever, have talked about these issues. This is actually a 2-year-old slide. It goes back to the committees that you've been on. Next slide. One more. The Safe Streets Task Force is a group that, quite frankly, is city, county, federal, community centric, and the things that they do are try to stop this epidemic, this gang epidemic, the gang violence epidemic, because it's not just gun violence, it's sex trafficking. Yeah. That's violence too. Drugs.
Violence.
That's violence too.
Yeah.
All these things that feed the violence. Next slide. Now, their mission is to reduce the gang and drug activity. But folks, we don't just do that by the law enforcement part of it. We do it through community outreach. That's where you go down to that last bullet, work with the community organizations with prevention and intervention strategies. That's where Phil your time has been greatly devoted to. But we still, here we are again.
Here. Yeah.
You and I, and you know, we mentioned in the last segment, in the newspaper last Sunday, there's a letter to the editor. Both Mydell and I are racist. Well, that's not the first time I've been called that. Sure. You know, I have a unique, I guess, outlook on this because I have been given awards for civil rights activism, and within a year I've been called a racist. So I'm like, I don't care. I know who I am.
Correct.
You yourself have had labels thrown at you.
Yes, sir.
You're a race traitor.
Yes, sir.
This isn't about race. It's about kids.
Yeah.
And
is
people
about
need
Ozzie
to
and Phil.
forget this.
It's about the
exactly.
community.
This is about kids, our kids in our community. Where did these people that want to throw these labels, what do they not understand about that? We're talking about children.
Yeah. Our future.
Our future.
Right.
And we're stepping up going, we need to stop this violence.
Absolutely. And we can't arrest our way out of it.
No, we can't.
Way back when we were part of the Northwest Gang Investigators Association, we talked about that. You can't simply arrest your way out of these conditions because there's obviously there's social determinants to why people would be attracted to a gang. And we go back to this again. What are we modeling and mentoring to our youth that tells them, I don't want to mess with Ozzie or Phil, I'm just going to go out there and you know, run with this set because they give me the love and attention I need. Somehow we're failing as community in giving them, we all want safe and vibrant and productive young men and women in society. But what are we willing to do? Or further, what are we not willing to do that if we did would help change this problem?
Well, if we go to the next slide here, one of the things that I think we really need to do is quit glorifying this gang lifestyle for these kids, because this 64, they are enamored, Phil. This is glory to them, and it's like literally watching an old version of the movie Colors, or the rap songs that you hear. They literally are sending rap songs back and forth to each other. And these rap songs are, okay, you killed one of mine, I'm going to kill one of yours type of exchanges. We have to quit glorifying this stuff. And this is not how men of strength act. It isn't. There's nothing strong about pulling the trigger on somebody.
Not at all.
Zero. And I think, I love the saying by Edmund Burke, you know, all that's necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Well, sometimes when you're trying to fix problems, you're going to get labeled, and you have to decide if you're strong enough to live with that label. Next slide. The history, we've kind of gone through that. Multi-generational, multicultural. Next slide. Our gang influence comes from across the nation, really Stockton and Long Beach are our main feeders. Next slide. Gang recruiting happens in our neighborhoods, our schools, our correctional institutions, and at our social gatherings. Sure. Next slide. And you might not be able to read this slide on the bottom as well as I was hoping, but we will never be able to arrest our way out of this. Phil said it.
Absolutely.
We will never be able to do it. But as long as we glorify what's going on in that photograph, we're not going to get ourselves out of this.
Yeah.
We have to stop people thinking that that is how we are. Yeah. And look how young these people are. Next slide. Because that's the age that it starts. And quite frankly, that is multiracial folks. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So graffiti. Phil, we have about 2 minutes. I want to turn the last 2 minutes solely to you. What's our next moves?
Wow. Our next move is really digging into this, sitting with this, understanding that it's going to take more than our law enforcers to solve this problem. It's going to take you and I, those that are listening to this call, working in collaboration with all of those parties, right? And I talked about from the electeds to our law enforcers, to our educators, to our community groups. This is about collaboration and not competition. I have to go back to that, Sheriff. Stop fighting one another and deal with the core issues and build out that collaboration. And last but not least, stop throwing around the labels. I don't care if it makes you feel better. I don't care if it gives you some relevancy in the particular ideological group you're in. I don't care if it's about a D or an R behind the name. This is about you and I, and it's about Spokane. Stop fighting, start collaborating.
Because if we don't, there's one group that's really going to suffer, and that's our kids.
That's right, that's right. There's a great saying that says, it's easier to redeem a young child than fix a broken man.
Very much so. We can't continue down this road. We can no longer continue to throw rocks at each other. And quite frankly, if you want to be as misguided as some of those people that wrote letters to the editor about this press conference, I got an email back from one of them. I didn't realize that you guys said all that at the press conference. I didn't realize you addressed that this wasn't just about law enforcement. This was about the community trying to get kids jobs, trying to break this cycle. And my response back will be, because I just got it today, yeah, you didn't even take the time to talk to me. And you have the audacity to tell me, or the people out there, how much you respect me because of the work I did with you on the death of kids in our community. But you didn't even have the courtesy to reach out before you picked up your poison pen. People do that way too often.
Too often.
You need to reach out. You need to get your facts, because quite frankly, you and I know there are activists out there that just love to stir and keep that division going.
Sure.
Folks, this is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. I hope you enjoyed this series. Phil and I aren't done.
No, sir.
We will be meeting next week with a group of individuals that have coming together to save our kids.
Yes, sir.
Because, again, sadly, some of these folks that old white folk that want to throw labels.
It's some old black folk too now.
That's true, but the ones that wrote these letters were old white folk. You need to understand, the Chief, I, and Phil don't really care about your labels. We're focused on our kids, and we don't want to see another kid go in a body bag. It's that simple. I don't want to see another kid go to prison for the great portion of their life because they killed somebody. That's what's at stake here. You can keep your labels. You can even keep throwing them. You ain't stopping us. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich. Have a good day.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.